Obviously, we'll have to wait and see what priority Kosovo has in the current administration. You know that Trump is obviously busy with China, with Russia, with Ukraine, and over the weekend, of course, the American airstrikes against Yemen in the Middle East. So it's not quite clear how much, not just Kosovo, but Europe in general, is going to have on the White House agenda. But I should imagine, nonetheless, that Trump will not have forgotten that he was interested in Kosovo last time. He likes to portray himself as a peacemaker, the man who can solve difficult conflicts that other presidents, other people can't solve. And so we'll obviously have to wait and see. I've said in previous interviews that I think it's important that Kosovo establish good relations with people in the Trump administration. On NATO, yes, there are some people, not so much in the government, but in the broader sort of Trump movement, who are skeptical about NATO, who are very isolationist. But so far, President Trump has not made noises about leaving NATO. He's been critical of allies that don't spend enough on defense, in his view, and he sort of made some remarks occasionally that maybe the United States would not defend those allies who don't spend 2% of GDP on defense. But today, 23 out of the 32 allies do spend 2% or more on defense, and that number will increase. So I think that President Trump will defend at least most NATO allies, because most NATO allies will be meeting the spending target. But Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, has been clear that the United States has no plans to withdraw troops, US troops from Europe. The incoming US ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, was testifying in the Senate 2 weeks ago and said that the US commitment to NATO is ironclad. Trump may move some troops around. Yes, there are some rumors that maybe he will relocate some troops from Germany to Poland. We'll have to wait and see, but that's fine in the sense that those troops will still be defending NATO's eastern borders. I think ultimately, NATO is a very important part of America being a global power. It gives the United States 3/4 of all of its allies. It's really in America's self-interest. So I expect some turbulence, but I do not expect President Trump to withdraw from NATO. Of course, the American presence is important. NATO, together with the United States and the Europeans, did the air campaign in 1999. The US and the Europeans working together brought peace to Bosnia after 1995, and of course KFOR has been there now for more than a quarter of a century. So it's been a big success story because of this transatlantic partnership. When you consider the deployment of American forces around the globe, in South Korea, in Japan, in the Philippines, in parts of the Middle East, and of course in Europe. What is the number in Kosovo is tiny. It's very, very small. It's not a big drain on the Pentagon budget, but it promotes an enormous degree of stability and deterrence as well in preventing aggression against Kosovo. So I really hope that those US forces will remain. Maybe the Europeans will have to pay more for that. I don't know, as I said, because Trump is very much focused on financial issues. But the troops, the American troops, also keep Kosovo on the radar screen in the White House. If the United States has troops in a location, it tends to be interested in the geopolitics of that location and play a role in the diplomacy of the region too. And so I think it's important, to have that visible presence of the United States, to keep the United States engaged in constructive regional diplomacy as well. I don't see the possibility of a new conflict, but there's always the risk of sort of incidents like we had with Bianska, of course, a couple of years ago, which was a terrible incident. And those incidents, of course, could spiral out of control. That's true. And we've seen, demonstrations and riots in the north. There are clearly people who like to stir up trouble when, with license plates or municipal elections or the role of the dinar in the Kosovo economy. They see a pretext to stir up trouble. So I think that's more the likely scenario, disinformation campaigns, propaganda, and incidents. And I think it's important, that KFOR work very closely with the Kosovo security forces, the Kosovo police, to have good intelligence, to anticipate these incidents, to monitor the border very meticulously. Not a major conflict, no, but unfortunately provocations, yes, and therefore the need to be ready to, as I say, to anticipate, to react quickly, and to prevent these incidents being more tragic or not as tragic as they could be. Let's put it that way. I mean, Bianska, when you look at the weapons of these paramilitary Serb forces, it was like a kind of mini army, which could have caused massive loss of life. And so it's almost miraculous that the Kosovo Police Service were able to prevent, that massive loss of life actually happening. We have to be honest, trust did break down a little bit in the last government, in the last EU administration, particularly in terms of the way in which Pristina handled the situation in the north, some of the statements that were made, some of the communications that were made. But I say in every interview that this makes no sense because the friends of Kosovo are in Brussels overwhelmingly. Kosovo has a European future. Its integration into Europe is vital. That's what the Kosovo people want. So it's silly to argue with your friends. You argue with your enemies, not your friends. And so I hope, again, that we can have now a fresh start. It's good that Peter Sorensen is there. Of course, there's a basis that was created by Miroslav Lajčák on which to build. I mentioned the Ohrid Agreement. There's lots of elements where we have, in principle, agreements between Belgrade and Pristina to move forward in, transport, borders, financial issues, and the rest. And if we could just get agreement on implementation of those things without necessarily inventing new agreements, we would be far forward. So, when you have an opportunity to reboot, take it. Of course, Mark Rutte, the NATO Secretary General, was in Kosovo last week with the NATO ambassadors, the North Atlantic Council. I mean, this is obviously politically an important symbol of NATO's commitment to Kosovo, which has lasted now for more than a quarter of a century. It's a good opportunity to not just hear from KFOR, but also the progress of the Kosovo security forces. I've said myself, as a former NATO official, that I hope that, NATO will deepen its partnership with Kosovo, do more things, more training, more security sector reform, more equipment, more interoperability, so that the Kosovo security forces increasingly look like a NATO force. Discuss the future shape of those forces. I don't know when Kosovo will join NATO, but I am a big supporter of that direction. And I think the key thing is not to lose time, not to stagnate, and to make sure that step by step, Kosovo keeps moving closer to NATO. It looks more like a NATO ally with every passing day. Hopefully the issue of recognition, which we continue to have to live with, will be solved quickly, both in the EU, both in NATO. I hope that at least, while I'm still around on this earth, hopefully for a long time yet, but I hope that, to really see it happen. And of course, it would give me incredible personal pleasure to see it happen.